Welcome back to the Relentless podcast, where we are always trying to bring you individuals, experts, information to help you thrive in your physical, mental, and emotional well-being. I have another repeat guest today. You are only one of two repeat guests, just so you know. And you're both in the mental health field, if that tells you anything.
Right.
We all need a little extra help. But welcome back, Kim. Thank you so much for being here.
It's an absolute honor. You could choose anybody. I know you know everybody in the area and outside of this area in Charlotte. And so I'm just honored to be a part of this with your amazing audience.
Thank you for sharing this time with me. Both of us, just so everybody knows, we're coming off a full day of clients. Mm-hmm. I was thinking today as I was mentally preparing for this conversation, we're not just sitting around and like, oh, let's do a little podcast together, with the extra time that we have. Right. Neither of us have extra time. We could be seeing a client right now, but we both have a passion to try to help our people. And both of us know that not one of us has all the answers, which is why I started this podcast. So if your listeners are listening to this or anyone that's new, I'm a massage therapist. I'm a body worker. I've been doing that for over a decade. And I learned very quickly that my clients are coming to me in physical pain that's presenting from a lot of other places. And I want to be able to give them information to help. And so that's really why I started this podcast, was to be able to talk to experts so that the things that start coming out of people's mouths during a bodywork session that I don't participate in, but I can be a good, resource for, I can send them this topic we're going to talk about today and say, listen, your body is holding all of this. Go to this person and talk about it and try to get it all to work together to be better. Yes. So thank you for having this conversation with me after your long, busy day of clients. Patience.
And it took a lot of bantering and a lot of negotiation for us to find a slot that we could do this. And I think and I know it shows your level of dedication to this mental health field, spiritual field, just overall. It's a comprehensive sense of self. Mm-hmm. And it always comes down to what allows me to connect to self and what's stopping me from knowing it's okay to connect to myself or how to connect to myself. And so thank you for doing the extra work so that we can present this to people and they can hopefully get something that they can digest and become a little bit more of who they really are.
That's what I hope. And before we dive in, congratulations are in order for a couple of things for you. So first, we'll save the best for last, but first you are a psychotherapist, number one, just in case anyone doesn't know. But you also have a speaking ministry that is a free mental health speaking ministry that you host here in Charlotte. And you guys have a new location for that, correct?
Yes. So grateful for that. That was an absolute God thing. I'll put it this way. So the church where we meet is kind of like an AA meeting inside the church. So the AA meeting is not associated with the church, but they just meet there. But still, where we meet matters. We want to be an affirming, loving, accepting place. And so Huntersville United Methodist Church reached out to us. We didn't provoke it. Like, it was just God's hand and said, hey, would you like to have your ministry here? And so very excited about that. That's a new chapter for us.
Awesome. New things are always good. Yeah. And since we last spoke, you got married.
I did get married, Sandra. I never, ever thought about getting married or wanted to be married until I met the most beautiful woman in the whole world. And my mind changed very quickly about marriage. And so now I'm married and loving being married. It's great. So thank you for that.
Well, congratulations to you and Larissa. I'm so happy for you. And now you know what it feels like to be able to tell people when you find the right one, you'll just know, right?
You'll just know. I just knew it was absolutely
It's so annoying until you cross over.
Yeah. I mean, even that, let me say this too, because this is related to what we're talking about. We got told by one or two people, do not get married until you have your first fight. So we're going on 2 years together and we haven't had our first fight. So I'm so glad I listened to my intuition and my own experience and not someone else's advice.
100%. 1000%. Yes. I was told at 21, I shouldn't get married.
Yeah,
because it's
too
not going to
young,
work.
didn't know enough, it'll never work, all
Hmm.
that, right?
Who are
Yeah,
you to think
yeah,
it's going to work for
that's
you?
right. People
So
say
yeah,
go through each season. I said, I'm 50 years old.
I've been
I
through.
don't need another season. I don't need anything. I don't need a date for 5 years. I
Right.
know. And I've
Yeah.
done the work. That's the thing, right? That's what we're talking about tonight. Those of us who have done the work and can have a panoramic view of ourselves and others, there is a beauty that comes in that. There's a simplicity in relationships that can come in that. The complexity comes when you're interacting with somebody who has not done the work.
Well, that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. So it
Segue.
is, yeah, and that's exactly why we're here. I was talking to all my clients know I have a little podcast, and they always ask me what's up next, and
Yeah.
I'm like, we're going to talk about hard stuff because life is hard.
Life is
And
hard.
people are difficult. We're all difficult in our own way. But it is, what is it? It's May 5th, 2022. And currently in today's world, there's been a couple of things that have happened that are on the news cycle with some famous couples that have prompted a lot of conversations. And it's one of those things where I think, good things can come out of bad situations, and conversations can be started from other things that may not be that pleasant. But Johnny Depp and his wife are in a court battle right now. A Will Smith slap heard around the world happened, and his wife are in some turmoil. And this podcast is not about their relationships.
Right. That's
but
right.
the spinoff of those situations obviously start conversations, especially in social media, about the individuals participating in those situations. And some of what I've been hearing is people using the term toxic femininity as the opposition of toxic masculinity, I suppose. So my first question to you is, what do you think about those definitions or classifications?
A great question. And again, so glad we're talking about this. So we have to just look at the word toxic. And toxicity means that shame is involved. Toxicity means that someone has come in and is telling me for their comfort level, I can't be who I am. So anytime that is happening, that someone is, and shame is always a gift, right? Like I always say, it's like an STD. You don't give it to yourself, someone else passes it to you. And then, and shame's so powerful that it renders us powerless without our consent or even our knowledge. And so the whole thing, no matter if it's non-binary, femme, masculine, whatever it is, the word toxic, where we got to really focus, is that we are so accustomed to being shamed that we don't know we're being shamed. And then when it becomes inside a part of our internal system, our love map, we're listening to a voice that we think is ours, and it's actually a shame voice. And that is causing crippling internal and mental disabilities and struggles that we're not naming. And so I think what's important is it's not the gender. It is the fact that you're being told you can't be who you really are.
It's interesting to me because, everybody has a assumption that they make about people when they first meet them.
Yeah.
And I have my entire life always had the same assumption by people that I'm the stuck up, what?
Yeah.
And an interesting thing with me is and I've done personality tests. I test more masculine than feminine.
Yeah.
And that's what you're saying is we all have the same hormones. We all have the same things running through our body, and we have, expressions of all of them in different capacities. Right. And I agree. Like, I don't like either of those terms. I didn't like the term toxic masculinity when it came out. And I don't like the term toxic femininity.
Right.
I don't think you can take a part of your biology and say that thing is bad in you. I had a problem with that from the beginning. But as we start to unpack, putting individuals together, you do have common, I would assume, presentations of behavior. Mm-hmm. So when you start working with individuals, especially in an intimate relationship, when trouble arises, expressions of anger, fear, jealousy, do they have a similar expression towards one gender or the other?
I think so much what happens is, and that like no one's ever called me like the most femme thing in the world. Like this is never going to happen, right? But part of how I come across could be very much genetic. It could be innate. It also could be that I learned at a young age because of violations that I had to be really tough. And to me, my gender betrayed me and got me hurt. And so part of my safety was to come across a bit more masculine. Just to give you an example, like even when people ask me my favorite color, which is pink, people are so openly shocked. And the fact that we even make a color, like a classification, and then we put judgment around that. And when we give each other judgment, we cannot connect. And so there is some truth into the categories we're in. I think there's a deeper truth when you look at about trauma responses and knowing that you have an internal family system, you have an internal map, and a lot of it was developed in the first 18 months of your life, and you will have no memory of that. And so you brought up personality tests, but there's also people who are curious, and curiosity is a beautiful thing, is finding out what your attachment style was passed down to you as a child. But the test you're going to go on and take and see online and all that, it's not a true test because the only way to truly test your attachment style, which is how you learn to interact with people and to feel safe, the only way to do that is to show you pictures, and the story that you come up with based on the picture really shows how you learn to attach in this world. And attachment and connection are not the same thing. They are different things. And so when people are getting into relationships, they're bringing in, most likely they don't bring in knowing how to connect. They bring in how to attach to tasks, how to be of service, how to be a taker. There's all the things that happen, and the jealousy and all the stuff that happens that people don't know how to regulate their emotions because they're coming in already with childhood dysregulation and not knowing how to regulate their emotions or their life experiences. And so they go in and subconsciously are wanting their spouse to be the one that heals them from that. But there's no knowledge of what they're actually doing. And so the pattern and the cycle continues.
I remember in our last episode, which everyone should go back and listen to. I remember you saying, and when you say something that you really want us to listen to, you stop and you pause and you kind of give it that, like, you're like, you are not your personality.
That's right.
Remember that.
Yeah.
So that's what you're talking about.
That's right.
As I always do when I'm planning to record a podcast, especially with you, I tell my clients, my friends, my audience, and I ask them, you're like, hey, I'm going to be talking about this topic. Do you have any questions on it? So I did that. And bringing up this topic with people is kind of like, I don't know, talking about vaccines. That's how
you get punched visceral a couple times, I'm sure.
That's how visceral people get about it.
Yeah.
And I was even giving up an opinion. I was just asking what theirs were. Yeah. And some people were immediately, I got just, punched by a couple people, basically, that even saying that those things is proof that I'm participating in the patriarchy in some capacity. I didn't really understand. By bringing up those two ladies and asking the question about toxic feminism. And one person told me that me speaking about Jada was that I should be investigated and interrogated, and then I was bringing about harm to the Black women in society. I was really tripped up by that one. But the point being, it's a visceral response to people talking about how all of us present ourselves in society. Some other people, because I'm self-employed, I have a small business. I'm a small business owner. My husband's self-employed. Most of my friends are self-employed, small business boutique owners. I've been in the spa industry for years before I started my own practice. And a lot of those people had a lot to say about working with women as a whole. Like, the spa industry is mostly women, and they had a lot to say about the toxicity that happens and the jealousy and dealing with people on a day-to-day basis in the work environment. So we'll get into more relationship stuff in a few minutes, but like you were saying, it's not just about intimacy or relationships, but dealing with people in a work environment. How do you begin to unpack? People have super personal issues, but it still expresses itself out in the day-to-day world. So as you are having these not so intimate relationships, like if intimacy is super important, your work is important, but not as important as the intimate relationship. Getting into a work environment, getting into business relationships, when people are expressing whatever it is they're dealing with or not dealing with, being the person on the other side of that, how do you start to help people deal with those situations when they run into them? If one person is acting toxic or negative or whatever, being the person that's not wanting to be involved in that, how do you, on a non-intimate relationship level, start to help someone understand how to work through those situations?
Yeah, great question. I'm going to go back to what you said a minute ago about a previous podcast about talking about we're not our personalities. And just to explain that your personality generally is your ego, but it's your unhealthy ego. It's your first development of your ego, which is very fragile. It's a fragile sense of self. So in that part of your brain where the ego is, unless you've done the work, your ego's job is to feel superior, separate, and protective. Its job is to keep you safe and small. That means if you grew up listening to country music, if you hear someone listen to rap music, you automatically think you're unsafe, even though you're not. Right? It means if your church listens to hymns, you go to different churches that have contemporary music, you automatically would think you're unsafe. Because your ego, unless it's worked on, its job is just to keep you really small and really safe. So just know all of us deal with that until we work to have an aware ego, which means you have understanding of all parts of self, what's unresolved, learning what hurts you, what offends you, figuring out how you see things, how you hear things compared to other people, and be able to go from an unhealthy ego to an aware ego to an awakened consciousness, which is the right side of your brain. It's a different experience. And so when we are there, we are able to tolerate those who are intolerant. When we have an awakened self, we can hear and see through clear lenses, opposed to there are certain things about me, Sandra, I've worked on, but there's not enough resolve yet. And so if you would make a comment about that part of my life, my response is going to come from a very fragile sense of self, a very fragile ego, and it will be very toxic in that moment. But there are people who, based on what we believe is to be biological, there's a biological vulnerability, believe they have great invalidation and toxicity in their home life, that they most likely end up with a personality disorder. And that is where there's a lot of toxicity, particularly cluster B. And so the DSM is what we use to diagnose people. I'm very anti-diagnosing people, even though it is a roadmap for people. But it's just an understanding there's a cluster A, there's cluster B, there's cluster C. Cluster B is probably what you've heard a lot about on the news recently with Amanda Heard, which is the irony of her name is too much, but we won't go into but cluster B means like borderline personality disorder, histrionic, it's narcissism, things that are a little bit more of common day knowledge of understanding diagnoses. But those means that like, there's a lot of drama, there are extreme emotional reactions. And so if I'm somebody who fairly healthy, but let's say if I have a preoccupied attachment, which means growing up I learned to be preoccupied with everybody else's needs and to neglect my own, and I get around somebody who is placing on me through clinginess, through borderline personality disorder, that their entire day and sense of self is based on me and what I do. That is toxic. That is toxic. And part of the difficulty in moral psychology, which was very much developed by Caucasian men, is that women were considered hysterical. Women were considered the ones that would be overly emotional because they weren't allowed to show emotion, right? So a lot of the diagnoses that are there are very much based on women, and there's an incredible bias that's there. Even with histrionic, which you may have heard about in the news, even with histrionic, they say either you're in the victim or the princess. So it's based on women. And I think that's incredibly tragic, right? Because again, you expect a woman to have it. You have implicit bias. You see certain behaviors in somebody, and that's what you're going to entitle them with. So, but if you're dealing with somebody with a personality disorder, one of the main things I tell people to do is do not think that they think the way you do. You've got to trust that the way they're treating you, what they're doing, is gameplay, and you have to stay neutral and self-care and interact in a way that might not make sense to you. But if you get very emotional and you fall for their games and you give pity and you go into people-pleasing or preoccupied attachment, they will trample you in a way that you would never do to somebody else. They'll do it to you and enjoy it.
Basically, think before you speak.
Yeah, well, and so one of the things I tell people is to really pay attention, because life is about connection. We're wired for connection. But there's an assumption and then there's attunement. If you're assuming what someone thinks, how someone else feels, what someone else can handle, if you're doing that, especially with someone who has a personality disorder, then you are going to get hurt because you can't guess how they think. I can promise you, I don't have personality disorder, but you will never guess what I'm thinking. I tell people, if you try to travel up into my brain, it's a bad neighborhood. Don't go there alone. But I don't think the way other people think. And the minute you start thinking for me, you're disconnected from yourself. And yourself is the answer. So once you disconnect from yourself and you start deciding this is what this person who's being toxic with you is thinking, and you start thinking, well, if I just love them enough, if I just do enough for them, they actually take that as gameplay. And you wouldn't, but they do. So it's really about not trusting what you've known. It's about knowing that they are not you. Do not think for them. Do not think that you're going to love them into treating you differently. This is a personality disorder that 95% of therapists, they won't see them. If you have borderline personality disorder, histrionic, or narcissism, most therapists will not see you because it's that much of a specialty. So there's no way you are going to be able to handle it.
I can't imagine trying to navigate that, especially in an intimate relationship.
Yeah.
And that's really, so I did a podcast with a marriage counselor, Emily. We did a Valentine's podcast that wasn't lovey-dovey Valentine's like everybody thought it was going to be. It was again, hard topics and hard issues. And that's really what I want to kind of to get into, is dealing with those difficult situations in intimate relationships. Because through that Valentine's podcast, the messages that I got back, I was very surprised because, we're always advocating for the individual that has the addiction, that has the mental health disorder, trying to get them help, trying to get them to that season where they're ready to receive care and overcome those things and get better and live a thriving life. And we talked about some of those things in those situations in that podcast. But what the messages that I got was, that's my husband, and I don't know what to do. I'm going crazy because if I bring it up, I'm the bad guy. Or I got messages, my wife is exactly like that, and I have no idea how to handle this. If she won't go see anybody, or if I bring it up, she gets mad at me. I'm always the bad guy. So trying to advocate for those individuals that are in a relationship with someone that may either be undiagnosed, misdiagnosed, or have a mental diagnosis, helping the individuals learn their own boundaries inside of an intimate relationship. One of the questions someone asked me is like, I get it. I get they need help. I'm here for it. But like, how many years do I have to wait for them to heal? And our family is getting ruined.
Yeah.
And our finances are getting ruined.
Yeah.
And now, again, with what I do for a living, their body is presenting to me now with pathologies that didn't come from their job, that didn't come from an accident or injury.
Right.
And something systemic and high cortisol chronically. And, people are starting to be, they weren't having a certain pathology, and now they do because of their relationship they didn't know how to handle.
Right.
So we're trying to figure out how to give an individual in an intimate relationship with someone that has said condition, addiction, whatever. So if you were going to be seeing this person coming to you, and that's what I would encourage people to do, even if you're not an individual with the thing, you still go get counseling. Would you agree?
Yeah, 100%. And so There's a lot to unpack there. So I appreciate what you just laid down. So let me unpack it a little bit. So if we're talking alcohol addiction, drug addiction, sexual addiction, if we're talking that level of addiction, then please know, and I've been sober for 27 years, that I did not get sober because people helped me stay drunk. I got sober because people stopped enabling me, because people walked away, because I didn't have anywhere else to turn, nothing else to do but to look in the mirror. So if there's an addiction and you are calling the attorney for them, cleaning them up, calling into the work, and you can justify all that. You can say, well, if I don't do it, then they'll lose their job and we won't have money. That is thinking very short term. And I get it. It's that instant gratification. But the things the way you're doing it actually are keeping you suspended right in the pattern that you're in. I just don't believe we're ever meant to live in a pattern. And I think when you're in a holding pattern, it's exactly that. You're on hold. And there has to be a detour. There are deep psychological reasons why you subconsciously married the person that you did and what's happening. And that is why Sandra is advocating for you to get your own. And I would get trauma-informed therapy. I would not go to just any therapist. I would find somebody who can help me figure out how my childhood experiences, how that is being interplayed and replayed currently. That if you needed someone as a child to see your pain and they didn't, you'll grow up and you'll marry somebody and all you want them to do is see your pain. But you're going to marry somebody that's blind, metaphorically. Symbolically, they're blind. And that is what we do. Now, we do this in an effort to get better, to heal, but without knowledge, without understanding of what we're doing, then we just continue to walk around the promised land and say, oh, look, cactus. Oh, look, cactus. It is the same thing over and over again. If you're waiting for someone else to get better so that you can get better, but the person you're waiting on is sicker than you are, then you're waiting on the wrong person. This is about you getting better. Just remember, people only do what works for them. I was raised by a mentally ill mom, and there's some paranoid traits, some bipolar paranoid traits, and also she saw things like, and still, I mean, I love her, but she's mentally ill, but there's a vulnerable narcissism about my mom. So what you've seen in America and what we're very accustomed to now is malignant narcissism. Very easy to detect. Vulnerable narcissism is different. It's like an emotional play. And so what finally happened for me with that, because my mom rejected me constantly. The more she rejected me, the more I would go towards her because I had to get her to love me so that I could then be deemed lovable. But I had picked the sickest person I knew to tell me I was going to be okay. And so it was never going to work. And so much breakthrough happened when I realized I hated how she treated me, Sandra, but I was treating myself the same way. I was not seeing my pain. I wasn't taking care of myself. I was waiting for her to take care of me. The power that came when I walked away from her and just took care and started finding ways to give to myself what I was waiting for her to get. So please don't wait for someone sick to help you get well.
As you were talking about that and letting people know that they have to put a stop to helping, I got chill bumps because I'm going to get emotional. When I do these things, I have specific clients in mind and I have specific friends and family that I know are hurting and they're feeling these things.
Yeah.
And speak a little bit about, if that is you and that's your partner that you're married to, it is going to absolutely suck for a little bit. If you have to be the one that says, I'm not going to do that for you anymore. And that was, I said it with a really bad attitude.
I like that attitude.
Because I'm a fighter. Yeah, that would be my bent.
Yeah.
But the person that's in that situation probably is not a fighter. They are in their own way, but they wouldn't have that voice.
Yeah.
So I really want people to feel what this is going to feel like to do that, to tell someone they're not going to clean up after them anymore, to tell them they're not going to give them money. A parent, I know these people, to not give your kid money to get drugs so they can get high so that you don't have to see them go through withdrawal.
Yeah.
In your situation, tell us what it was, but you had to, when you made that decision, you had to know I may be alone. This may be it. we may be done.
Right.
And in some capacity, you had to come to the part of yourself where you were okay with that.
Yep.
But we were still going to have a loss. It would, I've had this conversation with people before that have gone through these things. Their marriage dissolved, they got divorced and ended, and they don't understand why they're still upset 5 years later. I'm like, you had a death.
That's right.
The person didn't die, but you had a loss to the degree of a death, and you need to mourn that death. So can you kind of give a little bit of reality of what that's going to feel like if you find yourself in that position to have to be the one to take the hands away?
Yeah. Well, and it is truly an act of love to tell somebody that I can't get you better. I can't tell you how to get better. I just know I'm not going to be part of your sickness. And part of why a lot of people, particularly women, struggle is that they think, well, if he goes to someone else and gets better for her. And please hear me, that is not a love statement. Like, if you want someone to get better, you just want them to get better. And so just knowing the level of pain, I highly recommend Al-Anon. I recommend Nar-Anon. There's an amazing Al-Anon meeting in Charlotte, for those of you listening in Charlotte, North Carolina, that meets Wednesday nights at 7:30 on South Boulevard. It's for parents only. And I love these people. Some of them are my patients. Let me tell you, I love them because when they talk about people sending out, people send out the Christmas card and the picture of the perfect family and the long letter about how Johnny got accepted to Princeton. And you're like, my little Johnny got arrested for the 5th time. That's our family. And see, those are the people I want to talk to, because that's real. And it happens more than people realize, because we don't create safety. We don't create space for people just to be honest and say those things. If we were all being honest, most of us have a story like this. We've had a boss, we've had a parent, we've had a child, we've had a loved one that we didn't know how to interact with. And so the ways that we come up with, the strategies that we come up with, interact with them, actually causes more disconnection sometimes. And so because of that, seek professional help. Find a support group. Again, Al-Anon, Nar-Anon. If you're a Christian, there's a group called Celebrate Recovery. It's similar. It was started by someone who left Alcoholics Anonymous because he didn't want to just focus on alcohol or identify with his alcoholism. And so it's for people who have stuck in their grief. It's for people who are struggling because they are anorexic. It's just a group of people who are willing to acknowledge that they aren't perfect and they don't know how to connect to themselves. For those of us who have childhood trauma, what's meant to happen in life is that we're supposed to have parents to help us regulate our emotions and our life experience, like I said earlier. If that does not happen for us and we get stuck, what we learn, instead of learning that the threat's supposed to be that we're disconnected from self, and as parents, someone teaches us how to reconnect to self. For those of us with trauma, the threat is connection to self. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right to do something for ourselves. We have this idea of, I'm not okay, let me make sure you're okay. And if that's where you are, that is not a place of connection. That's nothing but attachment. And so it will never get you where you think it's going to get you. If you're dealing with someone who has a personality disorder and they have extreme reactions to experiences and you're being controlled by their emotional reaction, then I strongly suggest you get professional help to learn that it's about saying what you need to say, not how they react. Now, if you're in a situation where you're not physically safe and you can't do that, that's a whole different conversation we can have. But the part of growing up with my mom is that we were taught in the family, don't tell your mom because she can't handle it. Well, the more we did that, the more she didn't have the experience to handle anything. We actually gave to that, like there was encouragement for her to stay where she was and to not get better because we never spoke truth to her. Everyone tiptoed around her. And so we allowed her to stay sick. It doesn't have to be that way, y'all. It doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah. That idea of protecting her is almost like people that clean too much. Like you can sterilize your environment so drastically that you make yourself sick. Like, because we're supposed to have germs.
Yeah.
We're supposed to have difficulty. So there's
that's right.
always a very parallel between the body and the mind of expression. Mm-hmm. So obviously everything we kind of correlate back to COVID, but like
Yeah.
you can overdo clean.
Yeah.
You can
Well,
literally sterilize your
yeah,
environment too much.
you so got it. And there's a difference between pity and compassion, people pleasing and empathy. And so pity and people pleasing, this is part of what we do with people. We say, oh, I feel sorry for her. She had a really bad childhood, so I'm not going to have a boundary with her. I'm not going to tell her, please stop saying that to me. I'm not going to say, hey, like, so instead of speaking truth, I'm going to have pity, and pity is a disconnector. People pleasing, you're actually doing something for the other person, but you're really doing it for yourself. Either it's to feel safe, or you need there to be a need because you have not learned self-connection yet. And so you're putting on the other person to make you feel better. And that's pseudo-worth, but you truly are worthy. You don't have to do something to be worthy. So there's so much we get taught, and sadly, particularly in the church, gets really encouraged that we stay disconnected and we just be workers.
When an individual is dealing with a spouse that has some of these things we're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
help us work through the conversation, because they have their own defense mechanisms and strategies to defend their behavior. And one of the big ones that I see, especially when you get into conversations online, which I try not to do very much,
Right.
because again, you don't know what the person you're talking to, where they're coming
Mm-hmm.
from. So a lot of times it doesn't really do any good.
Mm-hmm.
But we have these buzzwords and buzz phrases that people use. And one of the big ones that I see is you're victim blaming. You're blaming that person for this. It's not their fault. You're victim blaming. So can you please, first of all, tell us what victim blaming truly would look like,
Mm-hmm.
and then tell us the difference between that and what it would be to be holding someone accountable.
Yeah, that's really good. So again, I brought up shame earlier, and so I'm gonna bring up blame because that's what you're talking about. In that, this is blame. So blame is disproportional. Either I think the world blew up because of me, like there's a fight in Ukraine because I sneezed, right? Just to give an off-the-wall example. That is blame, but put too much on me. And women do that more, just to let you know, we implode, put it on us. And the men are more likely to do external, and they say, it's not my fault I got a DUI if that cop hadn't been sitting there, right? So it's very external. Blame and responsibility have never met each other. Me taking personal responsibility for what fits in my hands, what is mine. Meaning like, I need to say something to you, Sandra. I am not responsible for how you hear it. I'm not responsible for how you take it or what you do with it. I'm responsible for my tone and my delivery, and that's it. When you start going into saying things like, I don't want to hurt her feelings. Can I tell y'all, your feelings clinically can't be hurt. They're just feelings, right? So they can't actually be hurt. But when you say I don't want to hurt someone's feeling, what you're really saying is, I'm in fear you're going to reject me if I speak up for me. So call it what it is. Let's stop saying it's the other person. We're really just scared to speak because we're scared of being rejected. We're scared of being abandoned, right? That's what's really going on. So first, that's the personal responsibility. I'm having a hard time speaking truth to you because I think you're going to reject me, or I don't know what you're going to do if I say this to you, and I'm just scared of the conflict. Let's just call it what it is, right? True victim blaming is if I tell somebody that I had a horrible experience with a man and you say to me, what were you wearing? That is victim blaming. When someone shares with you a hardship, believe them. Believe them. Create space for them. If you find out later that they're 1 out of 1,000 people that lied about an incident, then you can deal with that. But to not be believed, like invalidation is a form of trauma. So a woman gets raped, that is beyond traumatic, and then we don't believe her. So that's invalidation, another form of trauma. And then she has to go to court. And so can we please just believe people when they share what's happening? What's happening right now with all the Amanda Heard things, all that, like that is extreme. That is extreme. Most of us have a hard time speaking our tragedy. We have a hard time speaking our truth. And it takes so much to say it. So when someone says it, if you say to them, when I used to share with people, my mom abused me, people would say, but your mother loves you, which is why I titled my book that. Because again, what I got taught was abuse and love were coupled. Fear and love were coupled. Because when I would tell people my mom was hitting me, they would say, but she loves you. So now I just learned in that moment that love and abuse are the same thing. And that is victim blaming.
So again, helping us to start to parse out, like making this real. So if you're dealing with a couple, we're not victim blaming if we're holding someone accountable. I'm going to reference back to the other podcast. So you're talking about the certain personality type that will continually seek out the same intimate partner.
Yeah.
It's just like
Absolutely.
a different face and a different name.
That's right.
But they keep picking the same one. And you're not saying it's your fault you're getting abused if you have an abusive partner every time.
That's exactly right. Yeah,
that's not what you're saying. What you're saying is, no, you tell me what you're saying, but it's figuring out in yourself that self accountability. What contributing factor am I in this situation to reproduce the same results?
Yeah. It's so Harville Hendricks, Dr. Harville Hendricks, and his wife, Dr. Helen Hunt, and they were both in my podcast. They're amazing people. They came up with the imago theory. And some of this goes in a little bit of Freudian stuff. We don't really like talking about Freud, but some of it goes into that. But really, what happens is that we grow up and we marry a partner, the person who reminds us, the person who hurt us the most as a child, the person who gave us a wounded connection as a child. We marry somebody that represents that. It is incredibly subconscious. We are not doing it to hurt ourselves. We're doing it because we want a different ending. And that's where awareness comes in. That's why we need an aware ego. That's why we need to know all the parts of self so that we know who's driving the bus. So we can be the CEO of our own sense of self. Powerlessness means that we don't have agency over ourselves. We are called to be powerful. We're called to have agency over what's happened to us, and that starts with knowing the different parts, knowing the voices in my head, knowing what's going on, knowing the body sensations and what they mean. Like the anxiety that you're experiencing, don't make it go away. Find the message inside of it. There can be beauty in that. But without discovering that, then I don't even know what I'm battling, so I'm just going to keep creating the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, which to me is the actual definition part of trauma. And we call it insanity. I call it trauma. We do that because we're traumatized.
The concept of it's not your fault, but it's your responsibility to heal.
That's right.
And getting people to see that and understand that is difficult, I would assume, because they, again, because we're human. We have pride and we have, our own defense mechanisms, and it's going to take work to change those patterns. But can you unpack for us? You don't have to receive, you're not accepting the blame for the situation. It's not your fault that you find yourself here. And again, I'm going to go back to the body because that's what I do. Again, going through COVID, the obese population they were mostly affected by this thing, number one, but then really mean people that aren't educated in how to communicate good health were mean a lot of times.
Yeah.
But when I have a conversation with someone, to help you get better, to help you get out of pain, we have to start deciphering the factors that got your body to the state that it's in. So especially with something like obesity, that I could do a 5-hour podcast on that because that thing is multi-layered. It is multifaceted. It is not someone being lazy and eating chips and Mountain Dew every day.
That's right.
There is so many components to that.
Yeah, there's great
genetic.
In having
There's trauma. There is a high viral load. There is more than one virus in this world. There's so many things that go into that. But dealing with someone like in that's just, I just go to the physical body because that's what my mind goes to. But helping them understand, the way you got here, the whole thing is not your fault,
right?
But it's your responsibility to figure out how to work through it and make it better.
Right.
So when you're dealing with someone in the mental and emotional capacity or the physical capacity, it's that helping them see the responsibility side of it. And as a practitioner, I'm sure experience this too. You can't fix them. Yeah. I can't deep tissue massage out all of their pain because it's so multifaceted. So what do you see maybe the switch sometimes with people when they flip from making excuses or saying it's just it's my genetics, all my family is this way? I hear that one a lot. When it flips to them taking the responsibility and feeling in their body, it's not my fault. but it is my responsibility to change.
Mm-hmm. There's so much power in it just being my responsibility. And so much of our pain comes from the powerlessness, because there's such disconnection when we're feeling powerless. Shame comes in when we're powerless. Fear comes in when we have a sense of powerlessness. All that it's a neurochemical soup of disconnection. And the part of the brain where you can fix things, where you're logical, is also the part of the brain that doesn't connect. It's not a connector, right? Because again, fixing or doing a task for somebody is just doing a task for somebody. It doesn't mean that you're in a relationship with somebody. And so the connection, to me, recovery is connection to self and knowing that that's okay. So I have a responsibility to know how to do that. So this is what I have to know to do that. I have to know my old story, my first story, if I'm ever going to have a new story. So my old story is a story of an earning mentality. Right? I got taught as a kid, if you're going to sit at this table, if you're going to be a Honeycutt, if you're going to be a part of this and survive, you have to look this way, act this way, be this way, do this, be this way in the world of academia. This is the person you have to be. That is an earning mentality. That's a fragile sense of self. Again, it's just task driven. There's no connection. There's conditioned. That's your conditioned self. So the responsibility of looking at childhood and seeing what was unseen. What was your number one emotional need as a kid that didn't get fulfilled for you? Whatever that is, you're probably in a marriage or have a relationship with a boss or somebody right now that you're trying to get that need fulfilled. And without taking responsibility for it, without being able to tell your partner this is what that looks like, this is how that plays out, then you just get crumbs. Right? And it just goes into, then you'll work harder to please them and they'll take more and give you less. And again, it's just that pattern. So if I am going to bring in a new story in my life, be a new creation, I have to have new ideas. I have to do things differently. I have to interact with myself and tell other people my expectations of myself and them are changing. And that's a relationship. And so being able to sit with your partner and say, my number one need is attention. And this is what it will look like for you to do that for me. And this is, and that's vulnerable. And this is the whole thing about toxic femininity and masculinity. What it's missing is vulnerability. We have to be vulnerable if we're going to deal with all this shame, the toxicity. If we're going to be in a new relationship, then I got to be willing to be vulnerable and expose what I need if I'm ever going to have a connection to you. And that is the solution. Because I'm connected to you and you're unable to connect to me, then I have a chance. If I'm not connected to me and I'm completely dependent on being connected to you and trying to get you to connect to me, and you don't have that level of health, then I'm rendered powerless. I'm going to feel like the little girl all over again.
And in a relationship where you have an individual with addiction that they're dealing with or with a mental health disorder, and you have the other partner, again, we talked about last time, a relationship falling into disgust. I did some work many years ago with the Wounded Warriors, and they were talking about their caregivers often give out before the injured soldier. So when you're in a relationship or in a marriage with someone that's dealing with this addiction or this mental health disorder, like I have Maslow's hierarchy of needs up here.
Oh, yeah, I love that. Love that.
Can you, the partner that doesn't have those things you're dealing with, can your partner give you those things?
Yeah, so yeah, so this is part of why I love that you have Maslow's sitting right there. So I want y'all to please remember this. So the first level is basic needs. You're talking like food, water, shelter. The next part has to do with safety and security. That has to do with connection, safety and security. Starting to have a sense of belonging. Starting to feel important in your family. Like you start moving up. The minute that something happens, that your partner rips that away or unable to do that for you, and you fall down to basic needs. All of a sudden you eat too much or you can't eat at all. You sleep too much, you can't sleep at all, right? It's all of that. And if you don't know how to reconnect to self, how to get back up in safety and security to you, then everything's dependent on the other person. Instead of you being able to have somebody who helps you co-regulate, because that's incredibly important to have someone co-regulate. But if you don't have that, and if you do, can you self-regulate? Can you have self-compassion? Is there self-connection? How are you treating yourself in all this? And if you're not treating yourself well and they aren't treating you well, and I promise you, if they have an avoidant dismissive attachment style, which means that basically they are task driven and they believe the relationship is about absence, not presence. And you're the one fighting so hard, but you're not connected to yourself and it's all dependence on them. You will remain empty, but they're fine. I'm telling you, they will never be inconvenienced. They are going to do what they do. They are absolutely fine. And you are the one hurting. So instead of thinking they're the sick one, know that you are worthy of getting your wounds taken care of too. And to not hide behind them. Your stuff matters.
And that's why I'm so adamant about people getting care and getting their own therapist. And you're not a coach, you're a whole nother level, but somebody in their corner, you advocating for them, because they will fall into a mental disorder if they don't over time. In dealing with some specifics, that intimate relationship where you have the sick or the addicted and the person trying to help keep it all together, there's tons of conversations that go on there in those relationships. Someone use their health condition or their mental health condition, could that become an addiction?
Yeah, all of it's an addiction. And part of it too is understanding our thinking style is addictive, right? That if you're in this chronic disappointment, this chronic worry, and this chronic sense, and your way of staying away from self is to be hyper-focused on their health and what's going on with them. I mean, that's the codependency. That's the people-pleasing, or it's also a trauma response called fawning. And so that in the relationship, if you are feeding them and they aren't feeding you, you have to look at why you're okay with starving, why you're okay with emotional anorexia, because there's something going on with you. Yeah, there's really
is that a new term you just coined, or that's a good one?
There's a thing called sexual anorexia, and so I kind of played off of that. So I won't give myself too much credit. I'll give myself a little bit of credit, but there is emotional anorexia, right? And so that, I mean, really, even if, I don't have a right to tell somebody how to get sober. I don't, if something happens and my wife gets sick and she has to make decisions about what type of health care, what path to take on something, I don't have a right to tell her she has to do chemo, she has to do holistic. But if she refused to get help, I have a right to decide what to do next. And so we can see that when it comes to someone refuses to take insulin, someone refuses to get better. We can see that and say, you have a right to take care of yourself. The minute it's mental health, all of a sudden we downplay it and think somebody should just stay and be abused. And I just don't think that there's only one person who's ever walked this earth who was at his best being abused, and that was Jesus. And that's it. None of the rest of us will ever be at our best being abused. And we're called to be on this earth and be connected and be at our best and be our best self. And if someone is abusing you, then that cannot happen for you.
So is this one of the instances where the abuse can become the abuser, or the hurt, that saying the hurt people? So if you have an addicted individual or a person with a mental health disorder that's not being treated, they're not putting in the work, then they end up abusing their partner.
Yeah, so, we're all hurt, but there's a lot of people like us who do the work. And so, in that, my window of tolerance has just increased and increased the more work I've done. And so instead of walking around hurting myself and hurting people, I did the work. So it's just not an excuse. Again, it's that if I just look at you and go, oh, you had such a bad childhood, it's okay that you stay drunk every day and hit me. Like that is not the correct lens to look through. You have to look at yourself and why am I making excuses for someone else? If you struggle to have a voice with somebody, to say to them, hey, I need to get off the phone. If you struggle to have a boundary, there's work for you to do. And you might decide to do 6 months of therapy before you say a word to your spouse. Again, if you are with a narcissistic asshole and you're being verbally and physically abused, then let's get you an exit plan. Let's help you escape, right? I've been doing this for over 20 years, I've worked with thousands of people. I've had one narcissist get better, and it's because he lost everything. And he went inpatient and went into treatment for almost a year. And he's now walked away from sexual addiction, alcoholism. He beat his wife. He is a miracle. But I need y'all to hear, don't think, well, my husband's the next one, because he's probably not. Especially if you stay with him. So if you're going to stay with a narcissist, just be aware of what you're staying with. Just be aware what gaslighting is. Be aware how they're going to treat you. Be aware what they're going to say to you. And so that it's predictable, and you can still go out with your girlfriends. You can still go out with yourself, do things, and have some sense of life. If you're going to stay with someone with a personality disorder or someone in active addiction, be aware of what they're going to do. And if you're still surprised when something happens, please go to therapy. Because they are very predictable people.
And that's the thing, again, going back to body stuff, when someone is literally in physical pain, they cannot think straight. It's so hard to figure out your next steps to help yourself get better. If you have an injury, if you have, an organ collapsed, or, something legit physically wrong with you, it's so helpful to have a partner that helps you in that situation.
Right.
When you are in a marriage or in a relationship, any intimate relationship, and again, like you said, it could be boss, it could be best friend, it could be a coworker that you're not leaving your job, so you have to figure out how to deal with them. Yeah. But the hardest ones, I would imagine, are intimate. When you're going through that, that's why I keep telling people, you can't think clearly. It's very difficult for you to think about your next steps. That's why having someone like you in your corner helps you get a game plan together. Like one of my clients today, she is having her first infusion for cancer. And so I was working with her to sit down and write out things she's going to take with her. She's going to take her own blanket. She's going to take music. She's going to take her iPad to watch a movie. Yeah. She's going to take her own slippers. She's going to take some essential oils. And and as I was saying these things, to me, this is like normal, because I know if I can help her nervous system stay calm, the treatment is going to be better. I'm having nothing to do with a cancer infusion, except I am, because if I can get her physical body into a state of rest and digest while this other thing is going on. It's been proven with cancer treatments that it's just better. So her having a list of things to do, to be ready for, I've sent her a 20-minute breath work things she's going to do while she's getting the infusion. So all these positive things she's doing during this thing that's super hard. That's what I'm there for the physical. If you are with a person that's undiagnosed, untreated, or not doing the work, you yourself need a game plan. And just having that game plan, having that list in your head that you guys sit down and work together, because each couple is going to be really different. Just like our fingerprints, we have our relationship is completely different given who we are with. But you sitting down with someone and helping them, like, okay, if they do this, you need to say this and then zip it. Or if they're doing this behavior, this is what you do. So just having a game plan starts to release your brain chemicals to put you in a better state to be able to handle the thing better. But if you are all alone, like you said, we are not experts in this. It's hard enough to live the human experience as the human being that's living it without a roadmap. I heard once that, like, men and women, we're more alike than we are different. Like most of us, we're all so similar. Only on the very edges of the extremes are we super different, because the outcomes are worse. So for example, with violence, obviously a man is going to have more damage. And I've heard that women, when they're super volatile, they go towards things like destruction of character. So making false claims, that would be an example of one of them. I've heard another one with men in the situation with a woman that's having a hard time. One of the hardest things I can only imagine is she constantly threatens to commit suicide. So when a person is dealing with someone like that, how would you even start to help them figure that out,
Yeah.
because I've heard that often. Like that is the worst thing you can say. I would imagine.
It is.
And
Well,
what if you do leave? And what if they do that? Like,
that's right.
how in the world do you handle that situation?
Yeah. So very sensitive topic for me. I've experienced this in real life too much, right? And so I just want to say that, I don't know if I believe in suicide prevention because, and I don't even like it being called suicide. So I want to call it what it is. People leave this earth because of bipolar. They leave it because of mental this defect that many of us died. I had three people that I know died this week. One died sober and one died from active alcoholism. And so it's just, it's just tragic. And so, but when people are using it as a threat, if you go emotional with them, then you're part of the problem. And I don't expect anyone to know how to deal with this. This is very, very difficult. And I've lost a lot of people. And so what I tell people to do is that you immediately call 911 and you ask for a wellness check on that person. You do what you have to do. You do what makes you that you will not have any regret about. And you take care of yourself. And that it is a horrible thing as a threat. And see, this goes back to people with personality disorders. They will say it as a threat, not as a truth. But there are people who I know that really say it because they're in so much pain and they just want it to stop. And so why I say I don't believe in suicide prevention, there are people who I've lost and I tell you there's nothing any of us could have done. We did everything we could. And that the person, I still believe this day, especially with Claudia, somebody very close to us, we lost, that she would be here today if she could be. But she's not. And so there's nothing that family needs to think about that they could have prevented that. But if you've got somebody who's mentally ill in the sense of a personality disorder, and they are saying that because that's how they get what they want from you, don't give them what they want. Get them treatment. And they will blow your phone up, and you block their number. You do what you have to do. And again, if you've got someone mentally ill contacting you, you refuse to block the number, you need to go look at why you won't block the number. Why you think you're so responsible. Because that's not responsibility, that's blame. All right? So some of you may know about this. It's called the Cartman triangle. I call it the codependent triangle. But it's just look at the three corners of it: victim, villain, and rescuer. Two people can bounce around from each position of this so easily. Three people can bounce around. But when you're dealing with someone with a personality disorder, then half the time they will be the victim. They want you to rescue. If you don't, they will go to the villain. They will be the persecutor. They will come after you. The narcissist is always the villain, and they always think they're the victim. But they are always the villain, and they want you to rescue them constantly. And they will play off of your emotions when you hyper reflect on what's going on, what they're saying. Just know they are deflecting, and you're hyper reflecting, and that means they win, so to speak, because you're working hard and they're doing nothing but actually enjoying what's going on.
So difficult.
So difficult. I just don't want us being manipulated. And that's the thing. If you're going to live with a narcissist, borderline, every day look at an Instagram feed that talks about narcissism and borderline. Every day, if you're dealing with addiction, keep up with people who are in recovery, read the memes, do all this stuff. We have to be reminded of their behavior because their behavior is so different than ours. We have to be reminded and not be manipulated by it. All right? Because what they'll do is they realize they're losing you, so they start crying, or they do whatever, or I'll do whatever you want me to do. They'll say whatever to get back in good graces, not to try to help the situation. They'll do whatever they do to get what they want. So please be aware of that. Be aware of the traits.
So I don't know if you guys caught what she just said, but what you just gave was an actionable step. Because if you're going through this, there's no quick fix. There's no my husband would play basketball yesterday and jammed his finger. He's going to take some, anti-inflammatory. He'll baby it a little bit and he'll be fine in a couple of days.
Yeah.
This is not that. A lot of shoulder issues I can help pretty quickly.
Yeah.
These things are not that. It is going to be the long game if you're going to stay. So what she just gave you was an extremely valuable tool to be conscious of what goes in your eye gate.
Yep.
So what we are receiving tells our body whether it can be safe or not,
right.
and gives it the next step that it's going to take based on what it's receiving. So what comes in my eye gate, what comes in my ears is going to either help me be better and help me handle this situation better, help me be prepared, help me to have the right thing to say, help me not react in that emotional state. Or if I'm disassociated from the whole thing, just trying to hide, just trying to make it to the next day, distracting myself with news and other people's crazy circus constantly, and I'm just staying disassociated, not putting any investment into the things that help me be better, I'm only going to get worse. So I've used that. I use that all the time. So I have people that, that they're having trouble getting pregnant or other things that are hard too, but not an abusive relationship.
Right.
But with like people that are having a hard time getting pregnant, everybody around them is getting pregnant and it's making them have even more anxiety and maybe some jealousy. It's just more difficult. So I'm like, unfollow them for a little bit. They don't have to know, unfollow them and make your news feed, curate your news feed to healthy things so that everything you see and hear is putting deposits into your account of good. Right. And in these situations, that is a huge benefit. Listening to podcasts that give you information, that help you learn. Because if you have decided to stay with this person, let's say you're not in danger. Let's say the person, they weren't shown a good example of what a marriage looks like and they haven't learned it on their own yet, but they're still good people and you think there's some possibility there, start learning about what was their childhood like, find podcasts about that thing, start to learn a little bit. But the more we can have a positive pool to pull from, the better outcomes we're going to have. So that's one actionable step that that you've shared with people. Going back to these families, and we'll have to do another episode. The sex, 2 more action things. Yeah. That's what I was going to ask.
Remember this, everybody. So we replay the dynamics in our childhood home in our marriage. And so if you don't know what that is, for a lot of people, it's come here, go away. And so once they get close to you, then they have to start a fight because they don't know how to stay close to you. So my suggestion is don't take it personally. If you personalize it, then you're going to work harder. And it's not your game, right? It's not your issue, but it's in trying to have a healthy conversation about it, explore it together. Strongly recommend Julie and John Gottman's work. The Dr. Gottmans are brilliant. They've done an amazing job of explaining marriage, so checking them out on YouTube. So that's one thing, doing what you can to not personalize it. You can be sensitive without personalizing that what their internal love map is, their lack of work they've done, all that kind of stuff. So that's one thing. The last thing I want to say about an action thing is do your best to not over-explain. When they say something to you, if your answer is yes, let it be yes, and don't explain why your answer is yes. If it's no, just say no. And if that's a struggle, that's some therapy to do, because when you over-explain to somebody with a personality disorder, someone who's mentally ill, they take it as weakness and they attack you.
Perfect. I'll make sure we bullet point those out because those are great.
Good.
What I was saying was we need to do another episode because you actually specifically said one of the topics that was on the marriage podcast when you talked about sexual anorexia. That was one of the couples that we were dealing with. The wife had sexual trauma and she had asked that they not engage in sexual intimacy until after marriage, and he agreed. After marriage, they tried 1 or 2 times and she said he hurt him, and she said, I don't want to have sex anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to, it's just not for me. And he's like, I'm there. Let's go to counseling. Let's do the work. I'll work with you. We'll do other things. And she's like, it's not, nope. So yeah, like people, everyone that's listening to this, everybody's got hard stuff. You're not alone.
That's right.
And everybody has something going on. I don't care how perfect their family looks. I don't know how perfect their kids are spit polished and shined.
Yeah.
My hair is always on fleek. I got issues too.
Yeah,
That's
right.
I mean, we all have, and such hard things. And you with what you do for a living, you've heard of things you never could comprehend happening to someone.
Sure.
With me having my hands on bodies for over a decade, I hear things. I'm just like, I can't comprehend how they're even here. I really
Right.
can't.
They're still making it. Yeah.
They're making it. And that's what our goal is for people, is to say, listen, there are tools at your disposal and people that are here. And that's why we're doing this. We're putting this podcast together because we know we can't talk to everybody all the time. Not everyone can afford to go to counseling. That's why you have icuTalks.
That's true. Very true.
There's a plethora of things at your disposal. Just start somewhere. The smallest thing. It could be following Kim on social media and just committing to look at her news feed once a day to pick up a little something. Right. And then tomorrow pick up a little bit more. Just wherever you are, just start something to give yourself, to feed your mental and emotional self, so that you can approach the day with that situation that you might find yourself in a better way.
Yes.
Any last words that you'd like to share with any individuals that are going through a difficult time right now? Like they're headed to bed tonight and they don't know what to make of everything. They're lost. They're confused. Yeah. They are frustrated, angry. What do you tell them going to bed tonight?
Yeah, great question. So just remember the definition of connection. Connection means that I see you and I hear you and I hear and see your needs and I observe you without judgment. And it means I do the same for myself. I see my needs, I hear my needs, I observe myself with grace, not judgment. Start there. Start figuring out, how do you find all these parts of self that are judging you, shaming you, giving you a hard time? How do we start pushing that back a little bit and being able to actually go give yourself some grace of never had any training in life to deal with this. Might be dealing with somebody that most therapists don't want to deal with, and you're still resilient and you're courageous and you're in it. You just need a little bit more guidance, and let yourself find that and know you're worthy of receiving. So much pain that we have around the fact that we won't let ourselves receive. And so give yourself grace and let yourself receive whatever assistance you need so that you can get to a different place than where you are right now.
I love it. Once again, Kim, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandra. You're amazing. I appreciate the time.
You are as well. Thank you.
Thanks.